Hi all. Today we're talking line quality. That's the variation of marks, of light and dark marks, thick and thin, to create volume, to imply light and shadow. And we're drawing shoes. So if you don't have shoes, what kind of world are you running in? For materials, you're using pencils on white paper. That's the regular drawing paper that you have. And you're going to use both your pencils, the hard and the soft. So you should have a 2H, that's the hard pencil, and you should have a 4B, that's the soft one. And the harder one makes the lighter line because the material is harder, so less of it comes off on the paper as you make the mark. But the soft pencil leaves a darker line behind because more material is dragged off of the pencil as you draw. So you need pencils, you need an eraser, you need a way to clean your eraser as it gets dirty. My drawing students, I always have them in their kit have a sanding block, some sandpaper on a little rectangular piece of cardboard, so you can find that in your kit. If not, I have a piece of sandpaper on a block of wood. That's just, you just drag the eraser on it and it cleans it off nicely. And a brush for knocking the eraser shavings off your paper. So you're drawing shoes, and one shoe, unless you're ambitious. 5. 2. 1's fine. And then I'd rather you do dress shoes over sneakers, simply because sneakers have so many micro mesh detail pattern stuff that it's going to be a nightmare to draw. Whereas a dress shoe just has like the tension lines of the material or that kind of thing. It's a more consistent texture. But I'd rather see you have, if you're drawing heels, for example, one that has some material on it, not just like a strappy sandal wouldn't give you enough material to dig in and draw. So pick your shoe accordingly. Then you also need to have some fabric and a light. And the light can be a lamp clamped to the side, it can be a desk lamp that's angled across your drawing, not just facing the drawing. And then you want to have the fabric pinned up behind the drawing or clipped up behind it on the wall behind it, and then have some nice folds and drapes and tension across folds across the surface. Don't just make it all smooth and flat. If you did, what's the point in doing that? All right. Here are a couple quick things to think about while laying out the shoe. One is to think about its basic shape, and that's, for here, this shoe is kind of in a wedge shape, like a slice of pie or cheese. So nice tall bit in the back. The whole part slopes down for the toes, and basically we ignore the missing part of the arch and just look at it like a big triangle. We can still do the center line of action here, but that leads us to center line goes that way, that way, so I can see that my basic center line is right. Then it's a matter of gesture it in, but come back to those basic shapes. I can see how this breaks off, and there's this other wedge up here. You got that negative space to contend with the heel. There are a lot of ways to start, just the idea of the basic first gesture steps. But if you start with if you start with the understanding of the basic shapes, it really helps go forward. One more thing about a shoe is think about it in terms of left or right. Like how this shoe basically curves that way. Why? Because it fits that foot. So from the top view, it runs out wider on that side, then the toe box happens. And so on. So this is the quick top view of the shoe. If it's the right shoe, it goes the other direction. Or depending on how it's turned, are you looking at the outside view or the inside? The outside view or the inside view. Slightly different dynamics for the type of view you have. So it's a wedge, but it's kind of a curve or a shifted wedge if you look at it from the top. Everything is about a gesture. I'm going to scribble through this whole thing. My first move is the center line of action. It's saying the object goes that direction. That way I'm not drawing an entire shoe and find out it's angled wrong. Then I gesture through it, I build through it. I scribble, I play, I don't worry about being right or wrong. Except for when you find out that you are wrong. Then you knock it all down again. Here it was just too big. I wanted it to fit on the paper better. I wanted to have more space on the right. So I erased the whole thing. Don't be afraid of knocking it all down again. Rather you do that than grab a clean sheet. The front toe box is shaped like a wedge or a cone. So instead of trying to trace around it, I just put in that basic shape. This is how I modify it, sure. I'm using very light lines with my hard pencil. You're going to start using your hard pencil to make the light lines and scribble through it. You're not going to go back and erase those lines. Just build on top. Measure the proportions. From heel to where the arch stops is 1 compared to the toe box is 1.5 of that. So you measure everything. You measure the length from here to here, or the height of a part against the length of the part. And while you're in the neighborhood, throw out those folds in the fabric while you see them. It helps to ground the whole thing. If you don't put those in, it just feels like it's floating. I'm constantly measuring and reworking. It's one of the heel to the start of the toe box, and then 1.5 to the toe. I'm looking for basic planes. Basic shapes that make up this side, this top plate, this top plane, this side plane, the inside of the heel, the side of the heel, and so on. And I can put a light line in there to demarcate where these planes happen at. That's what I did in the front, that very front of the toe. I can go back and round that in later, but for right now it's fine. It's a placeholder. This whole drawing is built on very light placeholders until you figure out exactly where it's going. And I rework the top part of that toe box 50 times in this drawing. The heel gets reworked 105 times. That's what I want to see from you, is a rigor. Don't be satisfied with, close enough. Be satisfied when it's done. There's no shading. Don't shade. Make this about lines to show the volume, not about shading to show it. When it comes to line variation, you want to have everything from a very thin, delicate line to a very thick line. You want to have a normal, everyday, medium thickness of line. Most of your drawings should be done in that light line to figure out where it goes. And then when you start to carve it in, then you go to a medium line. And then gradually up to a thick line. But if you do the whole thing in thick lines, it'd be just as flat as before. It's the variation that makes it feel like it has depth, volume, not how thick or thin the line is. The variation is what's important. If one side of the strap is light, the other side of the strap should be dark. So it shows a wraparound, a variation. If you make both sides dark, it doesn't mean anything. So if there are two lines that make up a plane, this side and that side, one line needs to be thin and the other line needs to be thick. You need to play the game of how to choose which one to make thick. That's why you make them all light as you build, and then you can darken up as you go. Not shade them in, just darken a line up. And then where the heel touches down, where the shoe touches ground, you eventually will want to make that a little darker so it shows the pressure, shows the shadow without filling in that shadow. Here I started to feel like the toe was too short. I know I measured everything. Sometimes you have to measure again. So I measured again and I brought it out longer. I could have settled and said, it's fine, but it didn't feel right, so I fixed it. That's what I'm looking for from you all, is if it's not right, you fix it. To imply volume, to imply a roundness to the object, you've got to stay thin on one side, thick on the other side. If the whole thing is thin, it doesn't do anything. Here's the example. So in one circle, it's all one weight of a line. So it looks like a flat circle. But if you vary that, it has volume. There's a light side, there's a thin side coming from the light source side, and a shadow side where it gets darker. I'm not shading it in, but I'm going darker with my lines on one side and lighter with the lines on the other side. That one feels like it has so much more volume than the circle. So with that said, I'm coming back and I'm adding darkness, thicker lines around the shoe. One side of a plane gets darker, the other side stays lighter. And I'll erase it back out if it gets to be too dark in places. I'm getting into all the nooks and crannies on the shoe. The shoe has cracks in it, has a texture pattern that looks like cracks. And none of those textured cracks can be darker in line than the shoe because they're not as dark. There are these depressions, not an edge made by parts of the shoe. So that's how I play this game constantly of what to darken, what to lighten. I'm checking, I'm rechecking, I'm adjusting. I'm always adjusting. There's a tangent right here where the line coming across the texture of the shoe lines up perfectly with the line I put down on the cloth. I don't want that. So I shift it. Why don't I want it? Because it makes it look like that line is across the shoe and the cloth. So I move it, I adjust it. Even if in your still life, things like that really do line up, I would adjust it in the drawing so it doesn't look weird. So one thing can actually be in front of the other thing. Little tweaks are so much fun. Little bits of light and dark. It's the last bit that can make or break a drawing. And you're done. So the whole drawing counts. Every square inch of the piece of paper counts. I'd rather have the action on one side and then some negative space on the other side, but you still need lines to hold that. You're not shading, you're doing everything with line. And there you go. That's it, whole thing. It's about line variation. It's about starting with that gesture, measuring, checking, rechecking, reworking, 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 finding that line variation, using thick and thin lines to make it feel like it has some space to it, like it occupies space, it goes around. These drawings can't be about one shot and I'm done. I made my mark, nailed it, that's it, I'm out of here. It can't be. It's got to be more rigorous than that. You have to go through something. Don't settle. Get it right. Okay, go find a shoe. Go find a shoe.